Welcome to Psychology Radio. My name is Tabula Rasa, and we are talking about Chapter 3, which happens to be Neuroscience and Behavior. All of you that have taken biology are going to really like this chapter. It's a lot of fun. Let's go over the vocabulary so we can get an A on the test, which is what we really like. The first word is neurons. Neurons are just cells in the nervous system that communicate with one another to perform information processing tasks. There are approximately 100 billion in your brain. Speaking of a neuron, the structure of the neuron. There are 4 parts to the structure: the cell body, the dendrite, the axon, and the myelin sheath. The cell body coordinates the information processing tasks and keeps the cell alive. The dendrite receives information from other neurons and relays it to the cell body. The axon transmits information to other neurons, muscles, or glands. And the myelin sheath is the insulator. It insulates layers of the fatty material around the axons of some of the neurons. It helps speed it along. So the axon says, "Hey, dendrite, I got a message for you." And the dendrite says, "Send it over, axon." And that's how that communication happens. Let's talk about the synapse. That's the gap between the axon of one neuron and the cell body of another neuron. It's very exciting. It's a little tiny gap, but a lot of the magic happens in there. Let's talk about types of neurons. There's sensory neurons, which receive information from the external world and convey this information back to the brain and the spinal cord. The motor neurons carry signals from the spinal cord to the muscles to produce a movement. So that's motor. They're carrying signals to produce a movement. And then interneurons connect sensory neurons or motor neurons to other interneurons. That's how those are. The types are the sensory, motor, and interneurons. Now, there's a lot of communication going along around here, and within the neuron, we've got conduction. That's an electrical signal sent from the dendrite of a neuron to the cell body, and then throughout the axon. There's a transmission. That's the electrical signal between 2 neurons over that synapse, or the gap. Remember, there's that gap between one neuron and another? Electrical signal. And you have ions. They're electrically charged molecules. They flow in and out of the cell membrane, things like sodium and potassium, stuff like that. Then you got action potential, which is the electric signal conducted along the length of the axon to the synapse. So remember that myelin sheath is helping everything move along really smoothly and quickly? That electrical signal, the action potential conducted along the length, helps it move really fast. Let's talk about transmission between the neurons. You have terminal buttons. It's a knob-like structure that branches out from an axon. And then the action potential reaches the terminal button and triggers the release of the neurotransmitters, like a phone call, kind of. Transmitter is the chemical that transmits across the synapse to the receiving cell's dendrites. And then you have the receptors on the other side of the dendrites that receive the information. That's how that happens. The neurotransmitters, interestingly enough, are stored in the vesicles, and then there are enzymes that destroy neurotransmitters that get lost and go the wrong way and don't make it to the other side. Let's talk about types of neurotransmitters, okay? Acetylcholine, which functions including voluntary motor control, helping regulate attention, learning, and memory. Dopamine regulates motor behavior, motivates pleasure and emotional arousal, things like food, exercise, sex, or any pleasurable activity kind of along those lines. That's how you bring on the dopamine. The glutamate enhances transmission throughout the brain. Norepinephrine, that's mood and arousal. You're going to have to say that on your own. Norepinephrine. We're just going to skip it. Serotonin regulates sleep and wakefulness. Eating and aggressive behavior also have serotonin plays a part in there. Low serotonin can lead to things like depression. Endorphins, they act within the pain, the pathways and emotional centers of the brain. Excitement and action or exercise can trigger those fun endorphins to help overcome pain. Like a runner that sprains their ankle and endorphins kick in, so they don't recognize that there's pain there until they've actually finished the race. Kind of like that. Then we have neurotransmitters. Their normal functioning has a balance of each, right? Imbalances affect behavior, and drugs can mimic neurotransmitters. This is kind of exciting. It's the organization of the nervous system, where the nervous system is interacting network of neurons that convey electrochemical information throughout the body. there's a division of the nervous system: the central nervous system, which is called CNS, and the peripheral nervous system. For the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, they receive information from the world, process information, and then send commands to the skeletal and the muscular systems. With the peripheral nervous system, or the PNS, it connects the CNS to the body, the organs, and the muscles. The PNS is also in charge of the somatic nervous system, which conveys information into and out of the CNS. They help to perceive, think, coordinate behavior, stuff like that. The autonomic nervous system carries out automatic and involuntary commands that control things like your blood vessels, body organs, and glands. Things like your blinking, your heart beating, stuff that you don't have to worry about. It just happens automatically. Inside the autonomic nervous system, there are two kind of areas: the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic nervous system prepares the body for action in threatening situations like a fight or flight syndrome, or the fight or flight idea. The parasympathetic nervous system helps return the body to the normal resting state after that initial craziness has occurred. With the central nervous system, or the CNS, you've got your spinal cord, keeps you breathing, responds to pain, and moves your muscles. The spinal reflexes require no input from the brain. They just happen automatically. Let's talk about the brain for just a minute. You have something called your hindbrain, where the spinal cord ends and the brain begins. This is controlling the basic functions: respiratory alertness, motor skills, stuff like that. Then you have the midbrain, which orients you to the environment, receives stimuli from the eyes, ears, and the skin. And then you have the forebrain, which controls complex cognitive, emotional, sensory, and motor functions. So in the brain, you've got the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. Let's go over to cerebral cortex, the outermost layer of the brain. We're divided into right and left hemispheres. Each hemisphere controls the opposite side of the body. So your right hemisphere controls the left side of your body, and the left hemisphere of your brain controls the right side of your body. Seems a little flip-flop to me, but that's the way that it goes. These two hemispheres are connected by the corpus callosum. It helps communication across the hemispheres, located right in the middle. Let's talk about the lobes of the brain. The occipital lobe processes visual information. That's where your eyes gather the information and you look at stuff. That's your visual stuff, occipital. Parietal is processing information about touch. So parietal, I don't have a good memory, or I don't have a good trick for memorizing what this one is. You're just going to have to get it. Parietal is processing information about touch, parietal touch. Temporal is responsible for hearing and language. It's used for tones and pitches and music. That's your temporal lobe. So if you can play the piano or another musical instrument, you're using your temporal lobe of the brain to help you do that function. Then you have the frontal lobe, which is specialized for movement, abstract thinking, planning, memory, and judgment. And it develops until about the age of 26. So if you're younger than 26 and somebody talks to you about why you're not super organized, you could say, well, technically my frontal lobe has not yet developed and there's nothing they can do about it. The neurons. Let's talk about plasticity. This is kind of exciting. The neurons in each of the lobes are specialized for different functions, and these functions can be reassigned to do other tasks. So let's say some of the neurons get damaged, your plasticity, they kind of help take over so that other functions of the brain can still happen with lobes that are still working. This kind of reduces as you get a little bit older. So your plasticity reduces as you get older, but your frontal lobe at least is developed, so at least you got that, right? Emotional function of the brain. This is the last thing. Phineas Gage says a super kind man had a railroad spike go through his left eye, right? He survived, lost an eye, and had a huge personality shift. Changed everything he cared about before, like timelines, faithfulness, being on time to work, and swearing and all that stuff. It's interesting how when one part of your brain gets damaged, things are definitely different afterwards. We're not really sure if that's a true story or not, but Phineas Gage is the one that had the spike right through the eye. Anyway, that is Chapter 1. Hopefully you get an A and enjoy everything that you do this week. Have a good evening.